Hello friends, and welcome to a walkthrough of my project for my Nixon Independence Day speech from a couple of weeks ago. And in that video I included the animation as well as a speed paint of the drawing and the animating. So if you haven't seen that, maybe take a look at that first, then come back to this. And I've wanted to do something with Nixon for a while because I think he's just a fun character to work with. And with Independence Day coming up, it seemed perfect. So I decided to make a quick speech from him. And I didn't have much time as I only started it a week before Independence Day, so I couldn't make the speech too long, and I wasn't sure how quickly I could put it all together. And as it happened, I managed to complete it all in 3 days, but they were 3 full days. And I used this project as an excuse to try out an idea I had for animating him, but more on that in a minute. But first, if you like this sort of content, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified when I bring out a new video. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or purchase one of my small applications from my Gumroad site. All links are in the description below. But if you can't support me financially, that's fine. Maybe you can just share this and other videos in any groups that you belong to help them, and maybe they'll join our little community too. Anyway, back to this video. So after the main Nixon video last week, I showed a speed paint of one of the backgrounds to give you an idea of this process too. But since those videos came out, I've had a few questions about how I put the animation together and how I broke down the animation into different pieces, levels and columns, since the 2 videos went by so fast. So I thought I'd go through some of that today. So here you can see my video editor, Shotcut, showing all 3 scenes from OpenToonz and the music that are downloaded from YouTube Studio. So the bottom track here is the music, and the gap in the middle is where I change the volume from being loud to being quieter while he speaks. So the first chunk of video here is when I showed the flag and then fade in the message. And then in the video editor, that fades into the introduction to Nixon, where there's a slow zoom in to the desk, and then again a fade in to the last section, which is the actual Nixon speech. So these are 3 separate scenes in OpenToonz that I've created, and it's always wise to try and break down your scenes to make them easier to manage. It also means you can adjust the timing outside of OpenToonz when you assemble them together. And for me this was important to try and match the speech to start at the time when the sound goes quiet. So even though there's 3 scenes here, I actually created 4 scenes in OpenToonz. So let's take a look. So the first scene was very simple, and it's simply 3 columns with a background, which is just a vector level with a gradient in it, a Toonz Raster level with a picture of the flag, and then the text on a vector level. And I always use a vector level for text, and that's because it makes it easier to resize it to the size you need. So the only additional thing in this scene is the fade in of the text. If we go to the function editor and then bring open the schematic and go to the FX schematic, you can see I've added a transparency node to the text column. If I show the values in the function editor, you can see that from frame 73 is where it fades in from 100% transparent through to 0% transparent, i.e. fully visible. So if we take a look at the next scene, and this is the Oval Office. And actually I created 2 backgrounds here, and I did this on 2 different frames. So frame 1 is the wide view of the Oval Office, and frame 2 is the close-up of the desk. And I like to try and create the backgrounds in OpenToonz rather than externally when I can. And to do that I use different columns to act as layers. Now unfortunately I didn't quite plan this out as much as I should have. So I found some of the drawing getting in the way of some of the other drawing. For instance, the wall sections here and the carpet are all on the same level, which means that if you use the eraser against the wall, it'll erase the carpet as well. So what I should have done was put the carpet on one level and then these wall sections on a separate level. So that's something for me to consider for next time, actually building up each level and each column as a layer in the drawing. I did create a few layers. So here we've got the curtains, then we've got the window frames, and then the glass behind it. And then the next column on the side is the shadows around the curtains. And for that, I reduce the opacity, which is a really useful trick. And then in the scene settings, tick the box at the bottom here, so that opacity is rendered out. And then the main background of the walls and floor. And then in frame 2, for the close-up, again, I broke this down into different columns. So we've got the table at the front, then the curtains, the windows, the shadows, and then the plain wall. So individually, they do look a little bit messy, but once you put them together, and you've got columns in front of other columns, it builds up into a nice single image. And you might notice I actually used drawings from the same level in different columns. And that's because I didn't see the need to create a different level just for the different pieces being stacked on top of the other. So all I did to create a new drawing is I went to a blank space after the last drawing and chose Create Blank Drawing. And that then creates drawing number 14 in the same level, and I dragged that into a new column. So you can see the different drawings for the background here in the level strip using level A, and then for the shadows there's 2 drawings. So then to render these out, I just went to the output settings, put the same frame number in the start and the end, changed the output type to PNG and gave it a name. And this meant that although the background is made up of multiple columns, taken from drawings in different levels, it created a single drawing. So then I could import those single drawings into the animation, which meant less processing in the animation scene. So let's take a look at the next animation scene. So this is the basic scene where the camera just zooms in closer to President Nixon. And all this is the background drawing that I rendered out from the last scene, the sub-egg sheet with President Nixon's head, and a mask so that his jar doesn't go in front of the table. So if I preview that, you'll see that that masks out this area at the bottom of the jar. And if we take a look at the schematic, you'll see I'm using a simple matte out so that mask takes out any of the image of the head column. And then if we go back to the stage schematic, you'll see that the background, which is the background image, has got the head column and the mask as child nodes. So I apply the zoom to the background column using the animate tool, and then the head and the mask move with it. So if we take a look at that, so here at frame 49 is where the zoom begins, and as we zoom in, the head in the jar and the mask zoom at the same rate. And the head is a sub-X sheet, but I won't take a look inside it in this scene, we'll take a look at it in the next one, because that's where it's used most. So this is the main animation scene. So it just contains 3 columns that are displayed. We've got the background column, which again is a single image. We've got the head in the jar, which is a sub-X sheet. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then we've got the audio column, which is here to be rendered with the pictures. So let's take a look inside that sub-X sheet. And then you'll find another sub-X sheet, so we'll step down into there, and we'll work from here outwards. So we've got a sketch column that I just used for my initial sketches. And then we've got a reference column that I used to put in the colours, so I could use the same colours for Nixon and for the jar. And then we've got a direction column which is used to change direction of the head. So if I look in there and change the animate tool, if you take a look at the H column for the horizontal scale value, you'll see it starts off at -100 up to frame 14, and it flips to 100 on frame 15. And that's to change drawing number 2 from looking to the left to looking to the right. So what are these drawings? Well, the first column is the head drawing, and that is the main head shape and nose and ear. Then on top of that, I drew the eyes in a separate column, the pupils on top in a separate column, and then the mouth in a fourth column. And this meant I could build the animation for the mouth, the eyes, and move the pupils independently of each other, which made it much easier to put the animation together. So the head only actually has 3 drawings: the 3/4 view, the partial turn, and the front view. And then the eyes can blink and close for the turn. The pupils have a single drawing, but I've used the animate tool to allow them to look to the side and then to the front. And I was intending for the pupils to look around more than I did, so I didn't use them as much as I could have for this animation, but they've proved the point to me that they are useful for other animations like this. And finally, we've got the mouth. And they've got the 10 standard mouth shapes that allows him to talk, but also the mouth shape that's drawn when he turns his head. And then again, I've got the audio column so I could set up the lip sync. But the lip sync I set up manually this time by just extending a drawing and then using the Q and W keys to change the drawing for the relevant mouth shape. And this went really smoothly and didn't take too long at all for this small clip, so it's definitely something I'll do again. And if you're interested in lip sync, I've got a few videos that could be useful, and I'll put a link to the lip sync playlist in the card above. And in there I've got 2 videos showing 2 different techniques to automatically set up your lip sync, and then a few techniques to manually set up the lip sync, which is what I did for this scene. So one of the main experiments I wanted with this video today was to have different columns to allow animation for the eyes and the mouth, and then I wanted to package that up into a sub-X sheet by highlighting all the columns and then choosing collapse. If I step out of this sub-X sheet, so now this column here is the sub-X sheet with those columns, and on top of that I then added a plastic mesh on the head, which allowed me to add secondary animation to move the head backwards and forwards a little bit. If I just hit play, so at the start there's no animation there, and then you see there where he moves his head backwards. If I select the plastic tool so you can see the skeleton. So it's basically a simple animation of this top vertex moving left and right, and it's hinged around that bottom section there. With these extra joints set to keep the neck stationary at the bottom, so only the top of the head moves, and then the neck stays joined at the bottom here. And you'll notice the mesh is stretched quite wide across the side here, and that's because when he turns his head, so here when he turns his head falls outside of the mesh, so I had to extend the mesh. If I just zoom in, so I did this using the edit mesh option. So if you choose that, you can then look around the mesh and click and drag on any point to make it larger. So I simply did this at the right hand side to make sure that the mesh went wider than where his head goes. And this didn't affect the animation because the skeleton is just one single line through the centre. Then on top of that I drew the jar, which I drew in front and behind of him. And I drew a jar behind him so I could more easily do the fill behind the head character. And then again I highlighted all of these columns and collapsed these into a sub-X sheet. So if I step out of here, we can now see this single column is that the head plastic tool animation and the jar around it, which means on the main timeline it's much simpler to look at. And if you want to, much easier to add animation to the background or to the camera moving or to other objects in the scene. But one thing I did notice, setting up the lip sync and the animation on the character, OpenToonz kept up and played perfectly fine, but as soon as I collapsed that to a sub-X sheet and started using the plastic tool on top of all those columns, it slowed down considerably. And this is just for a single character, and in fact just the head of a single character. It's not even got the rest of the body. So if I had more than one character in a scene, it could be very difficult to set up. So I think what I'd have to do is to animate each character in its own scene, and then either import them as a sub-X sheet, or render each character out and then import the images once the animation has been applied. So I think that's what I'll experiment with next time to see if I can make it work smoother. Okay, so that's everything. That's how I put together this simple animation with 4 OpenToonz scenes and a soundtrack. So I'll be back next week with more Futurama animation. So subscribe to join me, and I'll see you then. And that's a Darren Tea.